when I left New York City to go cook in Syracuse, New York, the chef said, who do you think you're going to cook for there? I'm cooking farm to table 20 years ahead before anyone else got there. Maybe they were doing it in New York and in LA, but I didn't know that everyone didn't eat good food. And by the time the Wind book came out all of those years later, the Wind said to me, oh yeah, the cooking was practice. All of these things were practice for now. That kind of goes into the story today about becoming your own oracle. Because if you're one of those people who are way ahead of your time, you don't necessarily know if the clues are correct, if the signs you're getting are real, if you're really on time or just out of your mind, right? I want to call in the Wind for you first. And I want you to close your eyes because you remember the wind. You know the wind. When you were kids, you danced in the wind. We wind bath. We do that, but we forgot the wind. Close your eyes and listen to this whistle. And imagine standing in an open field. Raise your hand if you remember the wind, if you felt the wind. I'm here today to tell you that the wind is nature's oracle. And before religion separated us into Judaism and Muslims into Christianity, people were wind believers. In Turkey, the Yoruk were wind believers. And Holy Spirit is a wind. Go to the Catholic Church on Christmas Eve, and what you'll do is every time the priest says word, substitute the word wind, and you're right on target. What happened was when we moved from the outside inside, which was a really necessary thing because living outside wasn't necessarily the way to be. What happened was all of a sudden we put wind eyes up. That was the original name for windows. And we were blocked from the wind. And then all of a sudden, we needed to go to get our information from intermediaries. All of a sudden, what we were getting direct, what the deer get direct, what the bears get direct from the wind, we had to go to the priests and to these other people to see if what we were getting was true. And when the winds came, I was walking along the cliff of Eby's Landing up on Whidbey Island, and there was this craggly old Douglas fir making all this racket. And I look up, and I got this message, you're going to write a book about the wind. And I'm like standing there thinking to myself, like, people hate the wind. Why on earth are you giving me one more gourmet restaurant to run, but this time in the spiritual community that's going to be decades before its time? And sure enough, I was there like, okay, all right, because this is one time when I was 20, the astrologer said, you're married to spirit. If spirit tells you to go jump off the cliff, you probably will. When this jumping off the cliff was writing a book about the wind, I probably did. And luckily, Hay House recognized that this book hadn't been written, and they published it. They didn't tell me this, that I thought, I had set this vision out for years that I wanted to be a Hay House author from the time I was 27. But one of the things that I talked about in my vision board last week, and if you want to watch the video about it, just email me, is that we tend to lock down our visions. I was so intent at 27 that I wanted to be a Hay House author. I never said I want to be on You Can Heal Your Life stages. I never put the rest of it I wanted to be the Colette Baron Reeves of Hay House. But I had just put the vision out. I wanted to be a Hay House author. Got it. Been there, done that. So that's not to say that the power of this wind work isn't really important. And so over the last few years, I've met 32 more winds than were put into this book. Now I have 64 winds. And really, when I started doing research, there was 150 winds. Every single culture around the world has a wind god or a wind spirit. Some of them aren't gods because the Inuit do not believe in gods. They believe in indwelling spirits. And so these spirits are actually live energies that want to help you go direct. That you can become your own living oracle by taking a wind walk, by taking a wind bath, by asking the wind oracle, how do I move today in the wind? And we'll do that in a little bit. But I'm gonna back up just a little bit. And I wanna ask you, how many of you were ever ahead of your time and doubted yourself? Raise your hands. How many have you felt that you weren't, how many of you were like me? Went to psychic after psychic, tell me, what is in my future? Tell me, is this gonna get better? How many psychics are out there? And let's not discount them, because I was like looking around, is there one that I really wanna go here? But like for years, I'd probably have another house for all of the times I spent on psychics. But once I found the winds, and this is really the truth, once I found the winds, I knew the winds had my back. And I didn't have to call psychics anymore because I was going direct for information. And I would take a wind walk, a wind walk is when you go to the front door, you ask the wind a question, and you wait for the wind to kiss you on the cheek. And in Peru, they call that kissing the wind, because they've known that they never lost their direct connection with spirit. One time our shaman teacher told us about, he got to Peru, he was in Cusco, and the old man, in his 60s, had walked 3 days down the mountain, and he said, "How did you know I was coming?" Because they didn't have phones. Now they have roads, but back in 2003, 2004, when I started going, there was no roads. You had to walk 3 days. He said, "The river told me." Now, when's the last time the river told you something that got you hoofing it for 3 days down the mountain to meet somebody that you thought was coming? The truth is, if you start listening to the winds, they will start to inform you. They want to come in, they want to help you, they want to help you guide this time of the wind. The age of Aquarius, the age of air, the age of wind, and it's really blowing pretty chaotic out there right now. These winds of change, we've been studying, I'm looking around this room, I bet you most of you have been doing this for a few years, right? How many have got 20 years of study? The days when we used to be able to go sit in our spiritual boot camps is done. Now we're into the age where we need to be of service. And we need to be able to trust the information we're getting, because you and I both know you're not getting the information from the newspaper. And if you read both sides of the newspaper, if you go all the way to the right and you go all the way to the left, it's probably more confusing than ever. Because you wonder, how can these people over here believe that this is the truth? And how can these people over here believe that this is the truth when in my heart, in my body, I'm thinking, yesterday, I try to stay out of conflict. But recently I've realized that staying out of conflict may not be the best thing, because if one side has got this idea that they can just shut you down by saying, you're negative and you're this, when you know in your heart the truth is something else, because you come from your heart, and in Peru they believe the longest distance was from our mind to the heart. In order to speak language of nature, it's a heart language. It's about opening your heart and knowing what's the truth. Because over the holidays, or before the holidays, I went to my family, right? Now, they don't think the same way that I think. They live in Long Island, and in Long Island, things are a little different than they are in California and Washington. But you know what? Yesterday, my brother-in-law took my new book, which is a crossover book. It's not shamanic. It's a book about inspiration and hope for these times. And he said, your numbers are 111, 1111. He goes, what does 1, 2, 3, 4 mean? Those are the numbers I keep seeing. And we're talking about this man who, we didn't talk about politics at Christmas, but we could talk about 1, 2, 3, 4, what do we have in common? I believe the language of nature is the language of what we have in common. And trust me, this is not where I thought I was going with this talk today, but I think this self-healing oracle is about learning to trust what you know is to be true. So right now, tell me, in this room, how many of you are feeling a little lost, a little disconnected, and a little unsure of which way to walk? Yeah. It's prevalent. It's really prevalent, and it's really hard. So what if I said that the winds are here to help us? The winds have been blowing since the creation of this planet. You know, if you believe in the Big Bang, right? It was a wind movement. It spurred creation. Without wind, there is no life. There's always stories, if you go back to time, there's stories about how Adepa didn't like the wind, the south wind blowing so much, so what did he do? He tied the wings of the bird, and they stuck it in the crevice so that the wind didn't blow. And what happened? Anyone? The scum covered the earth, the ponds, the fish were dying, there was no air. So without wind, there is no life. And if you think about it, wind is the invisible, untamable, unknowable force of nature. So why do you think it was so easy to borrow for all of the religions? Because they didn't have a way to explain what you couldn't see and what you didn't know. But 50 years ago, plus, people left the churches. Mass exodus out of the churches. And how many, you've all been around for a minute, so you've all heard, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And you see how good that's getting us right now. These spiritual but not religious people who are fighting. I think it broke my heart the biggest to see that the spiritual community had the biggest chasm, because I thought we were all heading in a direction that we could all help the world with, but right now we're fighting too. So this idea of being spiritual but not religious is not really working. So we need to go back to nature. Because why? We are nature. Did you know that deer change direction when the wind's blowing? Hunters know that. There's so many times that if you learn to move with the wind, you're going to know what the next step is. Somebody pulled the card, I have the card reading there, they pulled the crosswinds. And sailors know when there's a crosswind coming, what do? You tack. You don't forge straight ahead, but you cross the lake, then you cross the lake the other way, and then you move that way, and then you get to your intended shore. And right now, I think we need to do some tacking, some changing, some finding some other ground. All of the traditions cross-culturally had winds. And even more important than, because there's 64 in here, and I found 150, but even more interesting is that we have defined our consensual reality based on the wind since the beginning of the word. Oh, we go back to the word. So sailors navigated by the wind. In the Lakota tradition, the story of how they got to, all of the winds got to the various skies was because the winds couldn't get along, and Tate sent all of the winds to different west, east, south, and west. But if you go back to the Mesopotamian tablets, they were directed in the wind. And so a little bit about this direction of your wind is that each and every one of you in this room are navigating from your own wheelhouse. So when you go I hope there's no readers in this room. Are there any psychic readers in this room? So I don't want to get anyone in trouble. But so when you're navigating from your own wheelhouse, like think of a boat, right? You're navigating from your wheel. You're not navigating from her wheel, and you're not navigating from her wheel. You're navigating from your own center of your ship. Take that to the winds, so that what they knew on the compass card, so when you're facing north, that's north for you. So people in Australia always ask me, what does that mean for me? I said that your north is different than mine. Your north is one way and my north is another way. So I have to learn to navigate from my own wheelhouse. And that's tricky, because that means maybe stopping with some of the external stimulus and going out in nature to get your answers a little bit more. And so I would have thought that I was insane when I started bringing this work in, but a couple of things started to happen. When I was writing this book, I said to my editor, because she wasn't liking, my editor and Greg Braden's editor are the same editor, and she's a really amazing editor, but she wanted me to get the East, the North, the South, and the West better defined. And I'm there like, I'm just taking those chapters right on out of the book. So the next thing, this is how I wasn't a very good writer. I've become a way better writer. But I'm there like, okay. So then I decided to make business cards with the winds, right? So I have a bowl of 150 paper scraps cut out, right? I start pulling winds out of them. Sure enough, I get east. Then I get north. Then I get west. And I didn't even pull the fourth one. I'm there like, all right, I better learn how to write these chapters. And I did. But that's not the only story about these winds. I was in Teotihuacan, and I wanted to get a wind whistle made. And so I found this, out of the blue, the sound scientist shows up. And I'm there like, I really want to get a nicer face than the death whistle made for my wind work. And he says, oh, I've got this guy. He introduces me. And this guy was a real curmudgeon, this sound scientist. And I'm there like, can I pay you? Whatever. He was just the whistle maker. And the day we started to ship the wind whistles from Mexico to the United States, they uncovered Ecatol's temple in Mexico City. And he's the Aztec wind god. And all I kept saying is, you just can't make this stuff up. And that's what the wind people say, you just can't make this stuff up. This kept happening over and over. There was the Latvian wind I wasn't going to put in the book because I couldn't find any information on her. The very next day, I call the editor. I can't put that Latvian wind mother in there because I can't find any information on her. Very next day, this doctorate thesis on Latvian mythology on a Latvian website shows up in English with no author. There was no author on it, and it was in English, and I just couldn't believe it. And I got all of the information about Latvian mythology from this paper that I can't even credit anyone but the wind. That's just really, so I'm just trying to tell you really that these winds are really important. I told you that the 4-direction winds have been our points of navigation in our life. Think about it. You're driving, you're going to head up the 405 north, right? Or the 405 south. And if you're thinking about being aligned to your nature, you might say, oh, it's 4 or 5 o'clock. I'm not heading on that 405 at all. I'm going to cut over and cut up. That's listening to the nature, right? But I'm saying you can take it a step further. However, I think that the coordinates are changing. I think we're shifting our time, because I just have been researching 32 more winds, and what I found was in the gates of Mesopotamia were actually not open to the northeast, south, and west. They were open to the northeast, the southeast, the southwest, and the northwest. Somehow, when the Greeks got into managing language, they shifted the points. Therefore, I think that the compass is shifting again, because When I wrote the first book, you would think that I would have found that information, but no, I didn't find it until 6 or 7 years later, until we had moved into the age of Aquarius. So I think the compass is shifting. I think that we're moving, yes.
How do you account for that?
We're going to, a couple ways that I would account for it. If you think that the axis has been moving, and we've been moving a few points every year. So perhaps the axis had been shifted to the timeline we're in now, and it's shifting again. I had a shaman once say that the earth could go dark for 4 days. I think she meant that they thought that it was literal, but I think the world is going dark for 4 days right now. I think we're in a real dark period. And so I think that we're shifting into a different axis, and our navigational points are going to be a little bit different. That means the things you used to trust for information may be just a little bit off. The places where you got your information before just might be just tweaked just enough that you're going to have to start finding other sources. And I know when I take these walks in nature, I see, you might tell me, you may be the Green New Deal or not the Green New Deal, or because I don't really get caught in those things. But what I can see is when I take a walk up on Whidbey Island, it looks a little different this year, or it doesn't look a little different this year. But isn't that a much more reliable sense of what's really going on in your world around you than looking at the Weather Channel? Recently, with the fires in LA, somebody asked me if I would do a reading on that. And in my deck of cards, I have this wind called Pazuzu. That's just the name that I got from it. It's one of the Mesopotamian names. And Pazuzu is the Diablo wind, the Santa Ana Diablo wind. It came in the middle of the reading. And I just couldn't, it was just like uncanny that these winds are really so accurate. They're giving us the information that we need. But I want you to have an experience of it. Because I could stand up here and tell you theory, because all of these experiences have happened to me and my friends over and over again. But I thought maybe that you should have an experience of it. Okay? So I was going to pull a card for the group, for this reading, for this area. And that's not my self-justification. Trust me, I try to paint them. I've paid a lot of people to paint them. Just didn't happen. Oh, why doesn't one of you come and pull it? I think that's a better idea. Then you'll think that I just pulled one out of my rabbit hat. Oh, wait, we can pull 3. We'll do a past, present, and future, and we'll see how it works for all of us, okay? Hold on, that's the past. And you were the first hand, so you... Oh, she pulled one right off the top. All right, so the past, what do we got?
The road.
What do you got?
The road.
Oh, yeah. One of my new wins. The present? Nilchi. What do you got?
Okay, mine is south-southwest doldrums, suspended action.
Very interesting.
Growth is paused.
Okay.
Waiting to go.
So this is good news for this group. So the past was a road, and then we had Nilchi, which is the instanding wind, which is what I've been talking to you about. How perfect is that? So let's talk about this time we're in, their erosion. Now, nobody likes to erode, right? But we're nature. And I have a chart which I could happy to send anyone, but my chart is of nature. As we end this epoch that we're in, we, like a tree that rots, when the branches fall off, it erodes into the earth, because what happens? The earth will mulch it, and then it will have a chemical reaction where it can then have nutrients. So nobody likes to say we're in a time of erosion, but we are. We're in this ending of a cycle. And the only way for this cycle to go the way it is, it's got to erode. Couldn't it be a little more pleasant? But yeah, who knows? When a branch falls off the tree, it's never really very pleasant. But it would be really nice if it could be a little more gentle on us. But if you think about an erosion, think about Michelangelo. All right? I like this one. How did he get the statue? He took off all that was not the figure. So right now, we're taking away everything that is not our nature. And I'm very compassionate for what just happened in LA, and also the fact that we built a city, what was 6 million people? What did you tell me, 6 million people last week? Millions and millions of people in the desert. And we weren't thinking about adding more and more houses, but when a forest fire comes through, it takes it down, and actually nutrients are made from the ashes and stuff like that, take it back into building something new. And so Nilchi is the Navajo wind of intuition, which is really what I'm talking to you about, taking a wind walk, to doing deep breath work, where you can actually become centered with yourself, so that when you go to Facebook or Blue Sky or Twitter or wherever you go for your information, you know that it's not the truth. The truth lives inside of you, because all of you have gotten here right now at this time in history because you agreed to be here. You agreed to be the masters of the light, the masters who are ushering in the end of one epoch into a new epoch. So we have to start to trust what we have to go inside to hear. But there's really good news in the suspended action card. So the doldrums. I love the doldrums. Except for the year when my book came out and I pulled the doldrums. I thought, oh, I'm never going to be on that stage because I'm going to be stuck in an animation, in suspended animation. So the doldrums are actually 2 places along the equator that Aristotle defined where the wind does not blow. And so ships would get caught in the doldrums down there for weeks on end. And what did they do? Anyone know? No. They would offload the things on the ship that didn't serve them, so like the horses wouldn't starve to death, so the cattle wouldn't starve to death. So what they did was they kept what was essential. And this is our way through, keeping what's essential for us in order to move forward. Because all of that other stuff that wasn't essential wasn't serving us any longer. It might have served us before, or at least we thought it was serving us, but it wasn't serving us now. So knowing that these 3 cards, okay, I want to call in the winds for you. I'm going to call in the directional winds, and then I'm going to ask you to meet one of these 3 wind spirits, either Wairatata, Nilchi, or the doldrums, and see which one has information for you right now. Are you ready? So how we're going to do this is we're going to do some deep wind breath breathing, because that's how we get back centered. And it's the 7-7-7 breath. But what we're going to do is we're going to breathe in, hold it to 7, and we're going to be those sailors out in the doldrums. We're going to send everything we don't want back to the earth, where it can be mulched. On the second wind breath, I want you to call, and maybe just see who comes, Wairatata, Nilchi, or the doldrums, and see who comes for you today, to see where you are in this cycle. All right? And then on that way out, we're going to merge with it. And then that third wind breath, we're going to do it again. We're going to count to 7 breathing in. We're going to hold it to 7. We're going to breathe out to 7. And we're going to see if all of these 3 winds can connect with each other to give us a solid path forward. How's that sound? Okay. Close your eyes. Uncross your feet. Planted. So I'm calling to Eurus, the east wind. Be here with us for this. Calling to notice the south wind. Zephyrus, the west wind. Boreas, the north wind. And I'm going to invite you to breathe in. And just breathe in the winds of this experience. Hold it. And as you breathe out, breathe down through the coccyx, down into the earth. Send this to the energy, into the belly of the mother. And remain empty. And now call either Wairatata, Nilchi, or the doldrums. And breathe into the count of 7. And as you breathe out, ride with that wind and see where that wind takes you. And in the gap, ask that wind to give you some information. And now breathe in one more time to the count of 7. Hold that information in your heart that you were given. And as we breathe out, let's connect those winds with all the people in this circle, all the people who are at this Conscious Life Expo, and all the people who need to hear the messages through their heart.